Welcome, everyone, to another awesome episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Today, we have a big podcast because we're going to be talking about big things. Not Andrew's fishing ego. We're going to be talking about actual big things. Today, we're going to be talking about shore casting for salmon. And to be serious, Andrew's pretty humble, so he's pretty chill. He's caught a few big fish in his time, but nothing so big that his head is swelled. But maybe one day he'll get there.
Stuff I catch on my BFS. Like, it was at least 12 inches.
So if you're new to this podcast, my name's Jesse. I'm your host, and this with me is my fishing buddy, Andrew. We've been fishing together for over 20 years. Actually, longer than that. Man, we're getting old, man. That's terrible. But anyway, in this podcast, we talk about our experiences that we've picked up over the years fishing, gear reviews, techniques, different things that we fish for in Ontario. And we hope that if you're just getting into fishing, or if you're someone that's been fishing for many decades as well, you'll find this entertaining and educational. So again, today we're going to have an episode about shore casting for salmon in the fall. Now, I know it's August. People are still thinking about other species like bass, but there's a lot of people that have already focused their attention to those big silver bullets that are coming to the harbors and rivers this time of year. So we're going to talk about that because it's very exciting. But before we do that, we actually have a very cool segment that we like to call Story Time. And to handle that, we have Andrew, and I have no idea what he's going to do. This better be a good story.
Well, I think Jesse will approve of this story because he had a hand in writing it. In fact, he wrote this whole story time because I have in my hands a letter from back in the day. I still have the odd letter kicking around of when Jesse and I, like Jesse alluded to in the introduction, we've been fishing together for decades. We've been friends since we were younger kids. And we used to call each other on the phone and talk about the Bass Pro Shops catalog, and we would write letters, sometimes on a weekly basis, just updating each other on what other fishing stuff we were interested in. Now, I wanted to kind of read over. I picked a couple different letters. So we'll see what time we have. But
this is going to be embarrassing.
I was laughing out loud when I read these. So this is kind of giving you an insight of how our friendship started and kind of like grew over the years. Just Jesse's much older now. I'm much older now. But I'm sure you get a kick out of this. So, to Andrew and Jeremy. For those who don't know, Jeremy's my brother. So, hey guys, what's going on, eh? Just thought I'd write you a page before I go to bed. I haven't sent you a letter since late fall or later. Sorry. I always write them, but lose them in my landfill. I mean room. It's April 1st. Well, in 30 minutes it'll be anyway. I can't believe March is over already. I went fishing yesterday and today down at the creek. Sadly, because of this unseasonably warm weather, the majority of the steelhead run is long upriver beyond the out of bounds. I only saw 3 steelhead today, and I fished probably 3 kilometers of prime fish-holding river. Yesterday, I brought my float rod and my ultralight for spinners. I fished a few really nice pools, float fishing with 3-inch white Berkeley trout worms. They actually work. I caught nothing, but did hook a decent rainbow, but we failed to connect and it was over as soon as it started. I switched to my ultralight, my favorite combo ever, and tossed a size 6 silver Panzer Martin spinner the rest of the day. Down towards the lake, there's this nice spot I call the trench because it's shallow, then dips down real deep. On my first cast, my spinner swung just above the trench, and a fat, foot-long brown swam up and nailed it. She dove under some logs, but stood no chance against my Pro Joe ultralight fish-fighting abilities. It was a fat hatchery fish, not a wild fish, so I kept it. You can tell because they have a fin clip. She was in good condition, and silver, which means fresh from the lake. Anyway, speaking of ultralight fishing, I love it! Remember that pair of steelhead I took last spring on my ultralight and 4-pound mono? That was sweet! The bigger one was 26 inches and like a thick 5.5 pounds. It's too much fun! Today I fished the same stretch of water, but left my float rod at home. All Claris Day. In the same spot as yesterday, I nailed another fat brown on the first cast, but she threw the hook. I continued fishing and at the end of the day, landed a 10-inch and a 7-inch brown and a similar-sized rainbow. Nothing much, but better than nothing. I don't think I'll catch too many steelhead this year. I'll be happy with 1 2-footer. The post-spawn bows are almost too easy to catch as they are actively eating on their way back to the lake. As you can tell, Jesse had quite the hubris about his steelhead abilities. The only problem is they all come down at different times, so are hard to find. Dang. Anyway, I can't wait to fish Lake D again. Aha. I have a spinner in mind that'll slay. A size 15 Panther Martin, which is around a size 4 Aglia. They run deeper than Meps, and that's why I love them. I started drinking my coffee black today. 3 cups so far. I don't know if it'll last. It didn't last time I tried. I've actually been playing the acoustic a lot last week. Haven't touched my electric. I learned a Bob Dylan song, Blowin' in the Wind, today. It's a classic and very easy. Good song to know. And then, talks about random things. But, at the end, he says, my computer time is up, so TTYL. From burger flippin', brown catchin', bass buying, fender strumming, ultralight king. Me. And I have to say, at the very bottom, Jesse was famous for his little cartoons and stuff. So he drew a steelhead, and the steelhead has a speech bubble, and it says, "Sorry, Jesse, I'm too far up the creek to catch. Blame global warming. Dang Al Gore."
Oh, good times, man. That was a long time ago. Oh my goodness.
It was. If you had time, Jesse, there is one more which goes over. I won't read the whole thing, but you give 4 different tips on how to deal with people when they come up to you and talk to you while fishing.
Okay.
So this is from a separate letter, because at this time my brother and I had never fished like creeks down, like the tribs coming off of Lake Ontario and whatnot. And Jesse grew up fishing them. So he's telling us stories of like random people coming up and talking to him down by the creek, which still happens to this day. So he says, people ask stupid questions. So they say, "What are you doing, fishing?" I say, "Moose hunting, obviously." This is also a way to tell how smart this person is, too. Really? I didn't know moose were in these parts. You better believe it. Then you look at them and gasp, shriek the color of their top. Green! Moose hate green! They've been known to trample people down wearing green. Then they walk away or run. For effect, make moose-like sounds. If that doesn't work, here are 4 simple methods I've come up with to avoid people. Number 1. Well, sir, did you know there's a $5,000 reward for any information about that guy who disappeared? I heard he drowned around these parts. I bet they'll give me $10,000 if I actually snag him out. Then start describing what you think the body would look like, all bloated and stuff. You get double points if they barf. Number 2. If they start walking toward you through some tall grass, yell, "Stop! I just crapped in there somewhere. I wouldn't want you to step in it." I've said that unironically. Number 3. As they walk towards you or ask you a stupid question, start yelling at them in German or French or something. Then let out a long girlish scream and bolt toward them, waving your arms around. They run. Number 4. Fish naked. Unfortunately, this only works if you're a guy. I can just see it now. Hey baby, let me show you how to cast again. If none of these work, then I don't know what will. So, if any of you are wondering why Jesse and I are such close friends, it's because that was a sense of humor that was absolutely hilarious to us, and Jesse was like the epitome of coming up with random crap like that. So That's why we've been close friends ever since.
People wonder and ask us many times why we started a podcast. It's because we literally talk about this kind of weird stuff all the time. So we figured we just record it, and apparently thousands of people like to listen and enjoy this podcast every single week. So if you're listening to this, thank you very much. And you're just reiterating the fact to me that me and Andrew's weird sense of humor is not as weird as we think, or slightly enjoyable. It's definitely weird. So thank you for that embarrassing story time, Andrew. Next time I'm going to actually get Andrew to send me his story time first so I can approve it for the podcast. But I feel like it might not be as fun because I'd censor a lot of that random stuff. When I saw those letters, I was like, uh-oh. I was just trying to think what I wrote before because there may have been some awkward stuff in there.
I've got a box of letters.
Oh, anyway. So I thought we could get into the main topic. We would first of all like to thank our buddies at Len Thompson for sponsoring this episode. Len Thompson, awesome spoons that are made right here in Canada. They've been making spoons for many, many, many decades, and they are fish catching machines. You think of what's the most popular Len Thompson? Probably one of the most popular spoons in history. What is it?
Diamonds.
It's the 5 of Diamonds. That's
Yeah.
Len Thompson. And they catch absolutely everything. We actually did an episode last year that we talked more about the history of Len Thompson and how he actually created the first Len Thompson spoon. So I'm going to put a link below if you want to listen to that, because that was a very interesting episode. But we would like to thank Len Thompson for sponsoring this episode. We're going to talk more about this giveaway soon and more about Len Thompson as we go on through the episode. So again, as we mentioned, it's late August. September is literally, it's so close you can smell it, right? And usually that smell is rotting salmon. I'm just kidding. But usually it's around this time that the majority of people are starting to think about catching salmon, because salmon fishing is exciting. You have these giant fish that generally are inaccessible to most people throughout the year, unless you own a huge boat. The average guy or girl now has the opportunity to catch a giant fish close to shore or in the rivers. Now, we're not going to talk about river fishing in this episode, but if you're interested in that and you can't wait for our river episode coming out in a few weeks, I'll link below our river episode from last year. It's all relevant information. Nothing has changed probably in river fishing for salmon in decades. So 1 year podcast ago is going to be just fine. So definitely check that one out. So I thought today, because last year we actually did a very similar episode. Now we do have a lot more listeners this year, so we're going to cover some of the same stuff, but not all the same stuff. So again, I'm going to link below our shore casting salmon episode that we did last year. So if you want more detail, listen to that one after you listen to this one. We appreciate it. So we're going to kind of go over the basics. When to start shore casting for salmon. Now, it really depends. Like, I know it's already been probably the first week of August and I've seen people casting off the piers. Mm-hmm. I've caught salmon. The earliest I caught a salmon was in late July. It was the last week of July after a big rain. So depending on the year and the rainfall, you can get them close to shore that early. But generally speaking, for most people, if you're not hardcore, September, late August is the right time to start, right, Andrew? Usually, Absolutely. Like, when do you start, looking through your spoon box and grabbing, your rods and putting line on your reels? Like, what time of year is that for you?
It's usually like August, when in the summer heat is just starting to die down, and like August starts to cool down a bit. Usually, there's a bit of a cold spell that comes through. That's really when I'm like, okay, I have to make sure I have things ready to go. I have to make sure I have good line on so I don't get snapped off. And yeah, I have all my spoons stocked up, because in a couple weeks' time, you go to the store and they're going to be sold out of all the spoons you want.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to talk about lures real soon. And that's the exciting part, because we all like buying fishing lures. I know we always buy too many, but it happens. It's a disease. So when it comes to shore casting for salmon, again, it depends on the person, because there's some people that salmon and steelhead and fishing the creeks and the river mouths, that's their thing. And that may be their thing because, they don't own a boat, or they don't have the ability or the time to travel to other lakes to catch other species, or maybe those other species just don't interest them. I know a lot of guys that fish for salmon and steelhead, they kind of like turn their nose up at like bass fishing. Oh, that's stupid. It's like, okay, bud. Standing in 2 feet of water catching salmon that are in 2 feet of water is stupid to me. Like, you can bash heads all you want, but it depends what you like to do. This is Jesse's little rant. It depends what you like to do. So what happens is, a lot of times in like late August and September,
up so much, Jesse.
I know,
making jokes, just like, listen, fools, this is my opinion.
That's why you listen to this podcast. You can hear Jesse rant. Unedited rantings. But realistically, in late August, September, the point I'm trying to make is you can fish for salmon early, but you may be the kind of person that's like, you know what? This is prime time for muskie, or this is prime time for bass. So in Ontario, we have so many fishing opportunities. There's so many species that you can target throughout the year. So what me and Andrew do is we try to pick and choose the hottest times, like the prime times for that particular species. So you won't see me down on the pier in August anymore. If you do that, good for you. That's awesome. I don't do that anymore because you fish a lot just to possibly catch one or two. You can have days where you catch a lot, but generally speaking, the hottest time, in my opinion, for salmon is the month of September. And that is the month that I focus on salmon. And even into October, when it kind of slows down, me and Andrew are already muskie fishing. So like we stopped salmon fishing. So, but realistically, from mid-August, I'd say, all the way into October, you can have a ball catching these giant fish. Now, we've kind of discussed this last year as to where you're going to fish. So, Andrew, when you're thinking about salmon fishing, say it's September, and you're like getting all your spoons ready and you're ready to go, where's like what's the kind of areas you're looking for, without naming specific spots?
Oh, you just caught me just in time there. So I always think of river mouths. Salmon are coming into these rivers, to these tributaries, in order to spawn. Whether they're coming from the ocean or they're coming from the Great Lakes, whatever they're coming from, they spawn in rivers. All salmon do. Now, the best thing you can do for me, if I'm shore casting for them, I'm not waiting till they get into the creek. But it can be difficult if you just choose any point in a shoreline. There may or may not be salmon coming along the shallow area there. So they're going to be congregated near river mouths. And oftentimes river mouths are right, harbors are built right in a river mouth. So fishing around harbors can often give you that access to a little bit deeper water. As they're coming in, you can usually have clear water to cast in because they're not going to be full of snags because boats are driving through there all the time. So you can usually get some good fishing opportunities at around some of the harbors and piers where there are river mouths coming in, flowing into the lake.
Yeah. And not all river mouths and harbors are equal. So in my area that I live in, without naming specific names, because they're easy to find yourself, we're not going to spot burn spots here, but some rivers just simply flow into the lake. That's it. It's like river, and then all of a sudden, boom, lake. Others, like Andrew mentioned, there's marinas or harbors built into the river mouth. So it'll be like the river, and then it flows into this huge sectioned off bay that oftentimes is dredged out or deep so that big ships can come in, or like bigger boats like yachts and stuff. So those areas oftentimes will hold fish in that area because it's deeper. There's a big kind of a protected bay from the wind, that kind of stuff. And those rivers that flow directly into the lake, the fish may not hang around there too often. And they may be good spots when the fish are actively pushing up. But other than that, they may not be as good in that situation. Now, say you found your river mouth. And you know what? The best river mouth generally is the one that's closest to your house. Not always, but don't think that you have to drive 3 hours. Do some research, find which creek that you have the most confidence in that gets a good run of fish. Find a pier or a river mouth, and then just go there. Go to the one that's close. Like I'll drive 20 minutes, 30 minutes to go salmon fishing, but I've also had really good success 5 minutes from my house. So if you're privileged enough to have a really good river within, a short bike ride or walking distance, or, a little car trip there, that's amazing. You don't have to like make a huge trip out of it, but if you do your research, definitely, if you're going to be driving like 4 hours and you want to catch your first salmon on the river mouth, and then do a few days. But that's where you're going to fish, river mouths. And generally speaking, like I mentioned, the deeper ones, those are the ones you're probably going to catch fish a little bit earlier in the season, like August. And the fish tend to hang around a little longer at the end of the year, so keep that in mind. Now, I think this is an important reason, and I'll let Andrew give the first point. Why is salmon shore casting so awesome?
Well, it's because whenever you're fishing for these fish, even if you think it's a pressured area, shore casting for salmon is you're getting fish that you've never seen, that have never been fished for before, and they've become accessible to you. There's so many times when you can't, you might have accessible areas, but the fishing pressure is so great there, you're not going to have a lot of success oftentimes. You're talking about, fishing off bridges or fishing on the public land in different lakes. And oftentimes everyone's fishing those spots and you're not going to have a whole lot of success. You need to kind of get away from the crowd. Salmon fishing or during a run is one of the few times when that's where all the fish are coming to you. And it doesn't matter if there's a bunch of people there, you have access to these fish.
in no other time, like say you have a small boat, like a little kayak, you can't literally troll out in the middle of Lake Ontario in a small, you shouldn't anyway. I know some guys have like big ocean kayaks that they go out in the ocean or the Great Lakes and troll, but you don't have access to a boat. What other time of the year do you have so many large fish come this close to shore? Like this is the time of year when you can catch the biggest fish you've ever caught in your lifetime. This is when it's going to happen. And I don't want to say salmon fishing is easy, but it's pretty easy. They're not intelligent fish. They're pretty dumb. We're going to get into that, why they're so dumb later. But the techniques are very simple. There's nothing complicated. I have took I started shore casting for salmon when I was like 12, 13 years old. And over the years, I've taken so many people that have never fished before and got them on salmon. Because it's not difficult. You just cast it out and reel it in. There's some little things you have to keep in mind, some little tricks and tips. But generally speaking, it's a pretty basic technique.
And it's mainly just time. It's one of those things where the salmon fishing, you have to be there. Again, it's not like you have to be there that one day when it's great. No, there's a span of time, a month, 2 months even, of time where the salmon fishing can be really good.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of putting in the time on those days. Certain days are going to be better than others during that month or those months. But if you, like I was talking to a workmate actually, because he wants to go salmon fishing this year. And I'm like, if you tell yourself, I'm going to go fishing after work down at the lake every 2 days a week for 2 hours each time, and you do that for those 2 months of September, October, or you start mid-August and mid-October, I guarantee you're going to catch a salmon at some point during that time. You'll have put in 20 hours on the water. You're going to catch a salmon trying all those different days.
Yeah, it's literally putting in the time. It's like a lot of times we think of like muskie fishing. They're like, it's the fish of 10,000 casts. Salmon are not as much casting. And muskie are a little more difficult to catch than salmon, obviously. But it's the same thing, like Andrew said. You have to put in the time and you have to go. And I know a lot of people get discouraged because when you're first getting into it, if you've never done it before, that first few days when you get skunked, you're like, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing. This is insane. And maybe it just happened that time that you went just wasn't a good day. Maybe it got a little warm the day before and the fish pushed out deep. They weren't coming in. Or the fish just sometimes they just don't bite. There are days when you see them jumping everywhere. And those are the days when they legit won't touch nothing. And then the next day they'll be slamming everything. So you just have to put in the time, force yourself to go. Just be like, hey, after work, maybe you work night shift, go early morning, go at night. And we're going to kind of talk about timing, like time of day. I've had a lot of people ask over the years when I worked at the fishing store, best time to catch salmon. Me and Andrew will always recommend nighttime. Nighttime is our favorite, pretty much from sunset, maybe to like 10:30, 11 o'clock. And I know there's always the saying, the guys at the pier will always say, the fish don't start biting till 2 a.m. Sometimes when the bite's good, you can get stuck out there for hours and you're just like, one more cast, and nothing. And all of a sudden you'll hook one, you'll get one in and you'll just get all like, oh, okay, now they're biting, then nothing for an hour. And then you'll hook one. It's just, you can be out there for days. Like I have seen when there's a big push of fish in, guys will be out there for like 48 hours straight, just like whacked. You see them, they look like zombies, but they've caught like 40 fish.
They look like the salmon will in 2 months.
Yeah. So we're not going to get extremely into this because we covered this in the other podcast that I've linked below, but think low light. So salmon, especially around the river mouths and stuff like that, they will go pretty deep during the day, especially if it's sunny, if the water's clear. Some harbors are murkier than others, and we're going to get into that when we're talking about lure choice, but they may hold fish slightly later as the sun's coming up, but other harbors that are more clear, I find in my personal experience anyway, most of the salmon will be very active early in the morning. And then once the sun goes up, they seem to just vanish. Like one time me and Andrew were fishing, we had a bunch in the morning and then maybe around 9 o'clock, the sun was up bright, bluebird sky, and the fish just disappeared. You didn't see a fish jump for hours. And you're like, what happened? Like they were everywhere. It's because they went deep. They probably went back a little bit out past the pier or deeper into the lake. And you just can't, you can't cast a lure that far. And if you can, show me, because that would be very impressive. It's like a 4 kilometer long cast. And then the other time, like we said, is when it is, low light at night, dusk. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. If it rains and it's cloudy and it's windy, those times can be really good. Like sometimes if there's a huge pouring of rain and it's, nice cloudy day, you can catch fish right in the middle of the day. So use your best fishing discernment, use your best judgment. But the main thing you're going to look for is rain. Now, fish, I don't know if they can smell the rain. I think that's what happens is they can smell the rain. But sometimes it'll just pour rain and fish will just load into the harbor and shoot up the creek really fast. And even like August sometimes, or even like July sometimes, there'll be a huge dumping of rain and you'll look in the creek and there's already salmon in the creek. And you're like, what? So obviously when it rains, it's pushing fish into the river mouths, into the river even.
And a lot of the reason why that's the case is from the research I've done regarding how salmon find their way back. It's amazing how they find their way to spawn in the creek. They respond in themselves, but apparently they're actually smelling not the river itself. They're smelling the land. So when there's rain, it's taking that scent essentially from the land, pours into the creek, and that's flowing out. That's the smell that's triggering them. Not so much just the creek water itself, the source of the creek water. It's from the land, the runoff coming into that creek that's really drawing them in. So it makes sense as well why when you have these big rainstorms, it's doing two things. One, it's flooding the water with all these odors that are going to be encouraging the salmon, hey, this is where I need to be, helping them zone in on it. It's also increasing the water levels, which means it's easier for them to get up the rivers.
Exactly. So that's interesting. I've never thought of it that way. But I wonder if the fish that go up offshore creeks smell crack.
Maybe that's why they're crazy.
That's why they're crazy, boys. So anyway, there are many opportunities, just to summarize this point, there's many opportunities and locations to catch salmon this time of year. You're going to look for ideally go fishing whenever you can. But honestly speaking, if you were like, the only time I can go is in the middle of the day at lunchtime, your odds aren't going to be as good. I'm not going to lie. But realistically, if you can go before work, after work, in the morning and the evening, your odds go way up. So try to hit those times. Look for days that it rains. And if you do that, and like Andrew said, you put in the time, you go down there, you put some of these techniques that we're going to talk to, basic techniques to use. We're not going to say guaranteed, but it gives you a very, very high chance of connecting at least with one of these insane Chinook salmon, which are amazing fighters. And it has to do with their size too, but they average like 15 to 20 pounds. And you have a good shot at hooking a high 20s, possibly 30-pound salmon. So it's the time of year to do this. Now, I thought we could talk about, before we get into the gear side of it, I thought we could talk about lures. And in this episode, we're only going to cover 2 lures. Again, we talked about so many different lures on our podcast from last year. And as well, Andrew, I forgot to mention, we did a full 45-minute long YouTube video years ago, before we even had the podcast, all about shore casting for salmon. We talked about everything. I'm going to link that below. It's got lots of views, a lot of views. I don't even know, at least 6. But I'll link that below too, so you can definitely watch that and give us a thumbs up. Appreciate that. So we're going to talk about spoons, and the other one that Andrew's going to talk about, you guessed it, one of the most popular Chinook shore casting lures of all time. Drum roll. What is it?
The J13 from Rapala.
J13, which is a jointed crankbait. It's actually a pretty decent size. It's like 5 1/4 inch long.
Mm-hmm.
It is crazy, and fish hate it. That's why they hit it. But we're going to get into that in a sec. So the most popular lures for casting by far is spoons. Now, when you think of spoons, oftentimes you think of spinners. Like, oh, spinners and spoons. I'll tell you why spoons are better than spinners for this application. You can definitely catch salmon on spinners. I've done it. But spoons are better because they cast so far. So when you're shore casting for salmon, you're trying to cast as far as possible because you don't know where these fish could be. They're not all huddled within 20 feet of the shore most of the time. Most of the time, you're going to want to try to cover as much water as possible. And a spoon is basically just a hunk of brass or a hunk of metal, and you can whip them super far. And they have a really cool fluttering wobble that salmon absolutely love. Most fish love spoons, but salmon fishing, when they're in the Great Lakes trolling, a lot of times they're trolling spoons behind the boat because they work. They're good. So the same thing happens when you're on the shore too. Now, trolling spoons are very thin and have a really erratic flutter to them. But the kind of spoons that you use for shore casting for salmon, they're a little thicker. They still have a good, I wouldn't say they have a really erratic flutter, but they have a really good wobble to them.
Mm-hmm.
Or as we would say, a sachet, kind of like flipping back and forth.
I was waiting for that word to pop up.
Yes, I know Andrew's going to say it. So when it comes to spoons, whatever brand that you have confidence in, that's the one you want to use. There are a lot of different spoons that people catch fish on. And if you ask, I'd say if you ask 100 salmon anglers what their favorite spoon is and what their favorite color is, you're going to get so many different answers. And every single guy will think his specific combination is the best. But in reality, there is no right answer. I know people are like, no, it has to be this. It doesn't. We've been fishing for salmon for a long time, and I've tried different colors. I've tried different sizes. And I find that size sometimes matters more than color. And color, I find, is more of like a confidence thing. Because I asked Andrew, what's your favorite glow spoon color?
I like blue glow spoons.
Yeah, I like green. You know why? Because green's my favorite color. I've caught fish on blue ones. I've caught fish on orange ones. I've caught fish on like the like peach colored ones with the orange dots on it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it matters. And some guys will be like, it absolutely matters. I've fished off the pier so many times, and whenever you see someone hook up, you always kind of look to see what spoon they have. And half the time you're all using the same one, or it's like slight variations, and it doesn't matter. You break off a spoon on a fish, you tie in another one, you catch a fish on that one. It's a completely different color. In my opinion, in my humble opinion of salmon fishing off the pier for 20 years, I don't think it matters that much. I think it's all in your head. I feel like if you're using a glow spoon at night, the slight shade of the glow, it's like, oh, it's glowing slightly blue. This one's glowing slightly green. I don't think the fish really care. I think they're more attacking from annoyance. I don't think they're like looking at night when there's like almost no visibility and being like, hey, that has the faintest glow of pink coming off of it. Attack! Like, I don't know. I've caught them in all the different colors. Now, here's the thing. If you have confidence in a certain color, that's the one you want to use because, as we always mentioned, confidence is everything. So we're going to talk about spoons quick. You've caught tons of fish on spoons, Andrew, down at the harbor. Those fish, they just slam them. I thought we could talk quick about hooks. So right here I have in my hand a Len Thompson #1. And then I actually have a #1 as well. But this is Len Thompson's this is their new series. It's called the Super Glow series. Now, Len Thompson always had glow spoons. And the new ones glow amazingly. And they have really cool patterns. This one here, I don't even know what they're called, but this has got like purple with really bright yellow dots with chartreuse and some white in the middle. It's a glow spoon. And then this is Wonder Bread, this one as well. They glow very well. They're not those kind of spoons that glow like the sun. And I know a lot of people think that that makes a spoon better if it glows like the sun. I don't think that's true most of the time. I catch more fish when the lure is dimly glowing. Myself.
The last cast before I decide to reglow it, that's when I usually get a bite.
Yes, and like I've heard guys be like, "No, I always catch them on the those certain brand of spoon that has like the super glow, and like you shine the light on it and you cast that thing, it looks like a shooting star shooting across the sky." I've caught fish on those, 100% I have. I don't think that most of the time that is as effective as a lightly, dimly glowing spoon. So the Len Thompson Super Glows, they do glow very brightly, but they quickly turn to that perfect amount of glow. And they hold it for a decent amount of time. I was very impressed. They come in a bunch of different sizes. The size that I would get is the Len Thompson #1. And the Len Thompson #1 size is 3/4 ounce. And that's probably the most versatile spoon size that most people use. It'll cast really far. It's not too big, but I'd oftentimes try a smaller one, the 00, which I think is like 1/2 ounce. And that would be like specifically for like, if I notice the fish are just being slightly finicky or off. Sometimes you'll notice that. Remember that time we were fishing, Andrew, in the morning, and we were chucking this 3/4 ounce spoon, nothing. And this guy beside us just walked up and he had this smaller spoon on. It was like a little 1/2 ounce spoon.
And it was the
first cast,
same brand, same color,
little spoon. And I was like, it's just too small. Cast out, caught a huge pike. Next cast, caught a salmon. Like he caught like in like half an hour, he caught like 3 salmon.
Yeah.
the same lure, the same retrieve speed, everything the same, just the lure is smaller. And it's not a huge difference in size, but you can tell it is a difference. It's a 1/4 ounce difference, but it is like, I'd say, what, 3/4 of an inch shorter?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So it does pay to have a few different variations of your lure, maybe a bunch of different colors, and then a bunch of different sizes as well. But before we go on, we're going to talk about hooks. Which style of hook do you like, Andrew? So most lures, when you buy them, like spoons like these Len Thompsons, they have a treble hook, which is a triple hook. That's the most common one. And then oftentimes a lot of salmon spoons have this single hook, which is called a Siwash hook. Now, which one is your preference? There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, my preference is the Siwash.
Yeah. And why is that? Why do you like the single hook?
So the single hook, it will result in less times where you'll throw the hook. So I have noticed some days where your hookup ratio may be slightly lower with the Siwash hook, but overall my landing rate is higher because they're not throwing the bait. They're not throwing the spoon. So I may miss one of the 3 strikes, but the 2 that I got connected with, I landed both those fish. Whereas with the treble hook, I may hit all 3 fish, but they've thrown it twice. I only land 1. So I prefer the Siwash hook because when that single hook gets embedded, like, there's nothing for them to pry against to loosen it out of their mouth.
Yeah, they can't use the other hooks as leverage. Now, sometimes you'll catch a fish on a treble hook and they're hooked really good, but oftentimes you'll get them and they're just hooked by one of the small hooks. Now, a treble hook has 3 hooks, but each individual hook is pretty small. If you compare that to the size of a Siwash hook, it's a very large hook and there's a very large barb.
Mm-hmm.
And
you
salmon
have
have
1/4 inch of length of hook point that
yes,
they'd have to pull out in order to throw that hook.
Yeah. And salmon have pretty bony mouths.
Very bony
Very
mouths.
bony mouths. So oftentimes the hook that's easier to slide into their mouth is going to get hooked better. So a Siwash hook is just a single. You don't have to get 3 barbs into the fish's mouth. You just have to get 1. Hook is bigger. It is stronger. I've never had one bend out.
Mm-hmm.
And they do, if you're doing catch and release fishing, they do a lot less damage to the fish. Now, there are pros and cons to both. Obviously, the hookup ratio on a treble hook generally might be a little better because there's 3 hooks. But like Andrew said, you will land way more fish, in my opinion anyway, on a Siwash hook. Now, everyone has their own opinion. I've talked to guys and they're like, oh, Siwash hooks are trash. I salmon fish for 30 years and we never use those and we never lose fish. Cool. Good for you. There are a lot of people, though, that use Siwash hooks. They absolutely love them. They swear by them. Realistically, you got to do what you have confidence in. If you've never tried using a Siwash hook, I would try it. See if you like it. If you don't like it, we don't care. We're just showing you options here. Okay.
Put them on a split ring, and you can just put the treble hook back on after. If you don't like it, just put the treble hook back on.
Yeah, you don't need to. Like when you buy a Len Thompson, they actually sell them with Siwash hooks, but their actual treble hooks themselves are actually very sharp. I don't even replace these ones, and they're great hooks. So you can buy a pack of Siwash hooks for cheap. I think like $5 for like a bunch of them, half a dozen at least. You just take the old hook off, you put this hook on, and you're ready to go. They're easy to sharpen because it's a single hook. And if you don't like it, put the treble hook back on. No big deal. But me and Andrew like the Siwash.
And just as a little note, if you are putting a Siwash hook on, I know we talked about it in last year's episode and also on the video on YouTube. But when you're putting the Siwash hook on, it is very important to hold the spoon as if it was you were drinking soup or something with it. So it's concave side up. And then put the Siwash hook where the hook point is also pointing up. That way it's going to actually engage with the fish. If you put the Siwash hook the other way where the hook point is pointing towards that, outward bending side of the spoon, you will notice you won't be hooking fish. So if you haven't had success with it before, and you're like, oh, I've tried it before, the Siwash hook never worked, just take note, make sure that it was on the right way with that hook point pointing up when it's concave side up.
Yeah, because it's easy to put them on backwards, but you definitely want it to do that. You also snag more stuff too if the hook is pointing down, which is something you don't want to do. And again, we're going to talk briefly about colors. We kind of talked about that. Different glow colors, doesn't matter. Who cares? Use one that you have confidence in. But if you are fishing during the day, some of my favorite colors are just silver. There's a regular silver is hard to beat. anything silver with a bright color on it. Sometimes you'll get the spoons. Like this is a Len Thompson. This is actually our custom Average Ontario Anglers Len Thompson with our loon logo on it. Super cool. Thanks to Jess and Brad at Len Thompson for that. That's awesome. But this is half silver, half blue, half silver, half orange, half silver, half chartreuse. All amazing colors. This is actually one of my favorites for a cloudy day that's still bright out. This is their brass. It's half silver hammered, or sorry, half brass hammered, half orange hammered. So that's an awesome combination. Also, all these lures, if you buy them for salmon, they work really good for pike fishing too, just as a heads up. So it's kind of a multi-purpose thing. So buy a bunch of spoons. I'd say like you could probably have full confidence buying 6 spoons. Buying 2 small ones, 4 big ones, 2 glow ones, 2 ones for during the day, and then the small ones, I get a glow and a silver, and you'd be good. 6 spoons, that's all you need. So we're going to talk very briefly about the giveaway, because you may be calculating in your head, how can I afford to buy all this stuff? You guys are dumb. I have no money for that. Well, one lucky Patreon member is going to win $100 worth of Len Thompson spoons. And I was talking to Jess from Len Thompson, and she's like, absolutely, let's get this in their hands before salmon season. So I was like, let's do it. Well, it was an email, so I didn't say that, but I said that in my head. So you could pick through anything. For $100, you get quite a few Len Thompsons, a whole bunch of glows, different sizes. Hey, you know what? We're not going to judge you if you don't buy salmon spoons. You can buy trout or pike spoon. That's fine. I'm not going to say anything, but that's an awesome giveaway. We would like to thank Len Thompson, Jess and Brad at Len Thompson. They're absolutely fantastic people. It's awesome to support, a Canadian business that has been making lures in Canada for generations. And their stuff is amazing. It is probably one of the top fish catching lure in Canada, 100%, is the Len Thompson spoon. So we do appreciate that. We're going to talk a little bit more about them in a sec, but that is the spoon side of it. Spoons, I'd say I use 80% of the time, because like we said, casting distance is important. Sometimes though, when the fish see too many spoons, there is one lure that absolutely slays. Now, what lure is that, Andrew?
So that's the Rapala J13. And it's a large jointed bait. There's a couple popular colors people will get them in. This one's Fire Tiger. It's probably the most popular, I would say. Another popular one is orange, but I've had success on the silver. I've had success on the silver and blue, silver and black. Any of the colors will work well for you. But having something that essentially is bright and flashy. Now, the cool thing with these is, when we often think of salmon fishing, you want to make them upset, aggravate them. You're triggering a strike. The odd thing is, these baits work so well, and yet they're completely silent. There's no rattles in these. They're balsa wood baits. So some of the pluses is they have a really good hookup ratio, because there's 2 treble hooks in these things. The downside with them is, and another plus is, they have an amazing wobble. And it's not like other jointed baits you may have seen where, the head kind of shakes a bit and the tail like dances a little bit. These things, as it comes, like the whole bait's just like going side to side. There's a crazy erratic wobble on these things. And that's what's triggering that strike, is that the movement of it. Just how spoons are effective because they kind of have that wide side to side action. I think that's the same reason why these have such a good response.
Yeah.
One of the downsides to them, I'll say though, is because they're balsa wood, they don't cast as far. So if you need distance in your salmon fishing from shore, like Jesse said, most of the time they're not within 20 feet. Now you can cast these things with a salmon casting rod maybe 80 feet. We can cast a spoon 150, if you really try.
Yeah.
So having the range is something you have to consider if you're depending on what you want to use.
Yeah. But there are times when the J13 or basically a jointed minnow bait will outfish spoons like 3 to 1.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the bite, for some reason, like when they slam a spoon, it's arm jarring. But when they slam a J13, they try to rip the rod out of your hand. It's like they're not just hitting it, they're trying to kill it. It's insane. I've had them actually, I think one of the craziest J13 bites I ever had is I was standing on the rocks, I was casting out, and I was reeling in. And it got to the point where I was just reeling in fast to cast again. And this Chinook came out of nowhere and just like waked. I saw like the water just wake, and he hit it like 5 feet from my feet. like right as I was about to pull the lure of the water, this fish just came up and tanked it and literally just like straight out. I was like, oh my God, my heart was pounding like crazy. They're so aggressive, and some days they won't take a normal presentation. They just need that extra crazy aggressive presentation, or else they won't touch it. You'll have something, just, a spoon just wobbling by and it looks all natural and good. They won't touch it. And you check out one of those and it's just like, it just annoys them and they slam it. So those honestly are the two lures that I use the vast majority of the time, is a glow spoon and a J13. Now, can you catch fish on J13s at night?
Yes.
I've had people ask me that.
And in fact, one of the things, kind of a little tip that I've done, is you can get a pot, like a small little hobby pot of glow-in-the-dark paint. This stuff I got off Amazon a while ago. And on this J13, I actually put on some Siwash hooks, and I painted this. I just kind of followed again. It's a Fire Tiger one, so it's just like the other Rapala J13 here, except on all of the kind of decoration you see on the bait, I was painting over top in this glow paint, just to kind of match the pattern, give some sort of pattern to it. And I put that whole back end, I just glowed that whole thing up. So when this thing is in the water, it's not only still giving off vibration, just like anything else moving through the water will, so they can key in on that, but it also has that visual component. They can still see, because this J13 is now glowing, just because I bought a $20 little pot of glue that has done dozens and dozens of lures, and it's still mostly full.
Yeah.
So that's a good tip if you still wanted to have that glow component, because you can't get, as of right now, you can't get a J13 in a glow pattern. But this way, if that's a confidence thing for you, need it to glow at night, why not make it yourself?
Yeah. And that being said, I have caught fish on crankbaits that don't rattle at night, that don't glow.
Absolutely.
So fish are very, very aware of their environment. They have a lateral line. They can feel vibration. And oftentimes we think that we look down the water at night, we're like, it's pitch black. But oftentimes if there's a moon, like if the moon's out, there is some visibility to these fish. They can see like shadows and stuff. So if they're feeling some crazy vibration of something wobbling around, they're all hyped up on, testosterone or whatever the heck the fish are, all hyped up, and they feel that, and they get all aggressive and they swim up and grab it. Pitch dark at night. So if you don't have glow, don't worry. For spoons, I definitely would recommend glow. You can get it, especially the Len Thompson super glows are fantastic. It just gives that fish something to key in on. And the crankbaits, though, they do have a little bit more vibration coming off of them. And I wish one company will come out with a jointed minnow bait with rattles that glows. We need to talk to some brand and be like, yo, this would kill in the Great Lakes. You know what I mean? Just something that rattles and glows. Ooh, man, maybe we should have a AOA bait to company. Just come out, just have one lure. So anyway, you don't have to overcomplicate it. That's what we're trying to say. You can literally buy a few spoons, one crankbait, go out there, and have just as good as a chance as any at catching these fish. Now, I get asked a lot. When we talk about techniques, I had a guy message me and he said, you know what? I like that you recommend the lures, but we don't oftentimes cover the retrieves. Fair point. So with spoons, we go over this in depth in those other links below that I mentioned, but with spoons, it's very important not to reel too fast. And why is that?
You don't want your spoon to spin.
Yes.
If you're reeling your spoon too fast, it is spinning. And there's two things. One, you can feel it. You'll feel when it's just kind of spinning through the water. More likely, you'll feel it when it's working properly. You'll feel it kind of thump, 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 thump. And that's because it's rocking side to side and catching that water. If it's just kind of vibrating as it comes back, it's most likely spinning. You're reeling it in too fast. But the way you can tell is cast alongside the shore, somewhere where you can see it visible in the water. Just figure out that pace. Maybe hum a song that's going to be that same, pace of you reeling in or something like that, just so you can dial that in and you can confirm visually that that's how you want that spoon to be fluttering through the water. And then make sure you just keep that pace on your far cast, and you know that it's going to be doing that.
I just picture Andrew casting out his lure and he's like, Just kidding. That's a good thing though, is to cast where you can see it and see how your spoon's reacting. Because oftentimes I'll see people cast out and just reel in pretty fast and their spoon's just spinning in. It's like you won't catch as many fish if your spoon is spinning. You just want it to wobble. That's a huge thing. And you don't want to reel in too slow. Because if you're reeling in too slow, the lure's not having the action that is attracting fish. It's just kind of a chunk of metal kind of being pulled through the water.
It only like kind of wiggles a little bit. It shimmies through the water, and you want to have it in between. You want that, as we say, that full sachet. You want it to go side to side.
Yeah.
Like it's dancing like a lady.
And Len Thompson, as we mentioned in our last interesting fishing fact that we did the podcast on with Len Thompson, is he spent years perfecting the shape of his spoon so that they had that perfect wobble. Remember Andrew, what he had in his boat?
He had a small anvil, like a hammer and a small anvil. He's like ting ting ting, like hammering away at this thing, tweaking it.
Yeah. So he would tweak his spoon, cast it out, be like, pull it in again, ting ting ting, and he tinkered for many sessions out on the water so that he could get that thing perfectly, and then he replicated it. So these spoons have a perfect wobble if you reel them at the correct speed. There's not like one speed. It's not like it has to be like, 1.8 kilometers an hour. And if it's 1.9, it doesn't work. There's a range of speeds. You can reel it in slow and fast, but make sure it's at a good speed where it's actually still wobbling. Because if it's spinning, you won't catch fish. Now, I get asked a lot, do you need a swivel when you're using a spoon? I used to be really against swivels, but I've come to the point where I don't think it matters. Especially at night. You're fishing at night. I don't think a salmon is going to care about a swivel that he can't see. So if you're someone like me that likes to change your lures, even though it doesn't matter, like I'll be fishing a blue glow spoon. I'll be like, this one's not working. I want to put on this Len Thompson Wonder Bread. If I have a swivel on, especially at night, or a snap swivel, I can just quickly change the lures, and I don't have to tie in a complicated knot at night. Or especially if the fishing is hot, my hands are shaking because I'm like, I'm excited. So if you want to use a swivel, by all means do it. You do not need a swivel for a spoon. If you reel them in correctly and they wobble, they won't spin your line. But why not? Use a swivel if you want. No one's going to judge you except for Andrew.
The one thing I'd mention is so Len Thompson, they actually have a swivel built in. Now it's not a snap swivel, so you can't just use it to unhook your bait, unclip your bait with it. But the one benefit that I would say to having a swivel on your spoon is it provides, I'm not going to say all swivels, but most swivels have a solid welded ring, or this one here is kind of bent over, doubled over, and goes back into the swivel body. So when you tie your line to it, it's a completely smooth piece of steel. If you tie your line onto the split ring, again, I've done it for many years, you can definitely do so. You'll notice the edge of the split ring has a bit of a sharp corner to it usually. And if the split ring is starting to separate, if it's been, pried open in the past, I have had my line, depending on the thickness of the diameter, actually start to slide through and come undone off of that split ring. So to have something that's, it could be just a matter on your spoons if you are concerned about that, put a solid welded ring if you're concerned about having a swivel fail on you. But Len Thompson's, they have some really, strong swivels they put right on the spoons themselves that are attached to that split ring already. So if you want, you can take them off. They're not mandatory by any means, but I do like having something that is one solid, smooth piece of steel to tie my line to.
Yeah, it's little things like that. You might lose one fish that was the biggest fish you've ever had on, and you're like, dang it, I should have put on that welded swivel. So, and then as for J13s, what kind of retrieve? I generally, again, you're going to cast it out, reel it in so you can see it, and you just want that thing to have an erratic wobble. The J13s are a little more forgiving. You can reel them in fairly slow. I've also caught fish just burning them in like really fast. So it really depends on the mood of the fish, and that's the kind of thing you're going to have to figure out when you're out on the water.
The biggest things I find with J13s is with the retrieve of them, one thing about their design is they actually have a cupped lip. So it's not a flat lip like your classic crankbait. It actually has a full cupped edge. What that does is it's kind of like the more recent like scatter wrap and things like that. It has a wider cupped lip and it creates that erratic action. So having this one, even though it's still narrow, it does give it a bit of an erratic action side to side, a little bit of hunting action on its retrieve. You'll notice that more if it's retrieved a bit faster. But at the same time, if you're fishing an area where, I know one spot we fished, there's deep water. Once you're past the 40-foot mark, it's deep water, but 12, 15, 20 feet deep. Then once you come in a bit closer in your last 30, 40 feet of the retrieve, you're above a weed bed. And if you're reeling in these treble hooks through weeds, you're going to have to clear your hooks every single time. So what you do is you just pause. These things will come up. They float right to the surface. And then just reel it in slowly. Or just at that point, burn it in across the surface if you can rip it that fast. But you could, if you want to keep fishing that water, because sometimes those salmon, they do come in on top of those weeds or right in front of them. You just reel in a little bit slower, and it'll only dive maybe like 1.5 feet, 2 feet. But on a fast retrieve, they can dive down to like 4 or 5 feet.
Yeah. So great versatile lures. And I think I've caught obviously way more fish on spoons, but
Yep.
the more memorable fish have been on J13s. Just, it seems like the crazy fish you catch on the J13s. I don't know what it is about.
You made
them,
a good
but
point, because I've never really put 2 and 2 together, but when you're short casting with spoons, when you feel the strike, and I remember for years, again, when Jesse was introducing me to salmon fishing, it was, from all those letters that he'd write to me about fishing for salmon.
Yeah.
He's like, tell me stories about, it's insane. They all of a sudden, like, they hit it so hard and they start running and they're screaming line off. And as a smallmouth bass angler, only catching maybe up to a 2-pounder, I had never experienced something like that. But when you fish with a spoon, I didn't know what to expect. How do I know when I have a bite, Jesse? How do I know? And he's like, trust me, you'll know.
Yeah.
And with a spoon, I find it'll also get a big thump, and it pulls your rod forward. It's not like you're running into a log, like something came across the other direction and hit it. But then it almost feels like the salmon stops. He's hit it, and he's like, I've got it now. Then you have a chance to set the hook. The J13s, you don't set the hook. I remember my first salmon ever. I was casting, and Jesse was like, all right, we're going to try and get you a salmon. I cast in with a J13, which Jesse let me borrow because I didn't have any salmon lures. And all of a sudden, it just hits us and immediately starts screaming line off. And it was on for maybe 2 seconds, like reeling in. Ding, gone. I'm like, what was that? He's like, that's a salmon. So what'd they do? And it's true. The J13s are a crankbait bite with salmon. They immediately start to run. It's not like they hit, they stop. They hit it and they're gone. They're taking that thing as far as they can.
Yeah. It's crazy. If you can get one fish this year, I really hope that it is on a J13 if you're listening and you're trying to catch your first one, because it is insane. Now we're going to go over gear very briefly. We go really in depth on gear in the last podcast that we did last year and the video. So we're not going to go in depth about this. I'm just going to run over this quick. As for fishing line, we are huge fans of braided line. Anywhere from 10 to 20 pound braid. I kind of like right in the middle, 15-pound braid. I ran 20 for many years, then I went down to 10. It seemed a bit thin. You'd actually snap fish off sometimes, or lures like on snags. 15 seems to be a good medium. Now, the reason you want to use braid is, especially at night, the fish can't see your line anyway, and you can cast significantly farther with braid than with monofilament, and there's no stretch. So if you whip out your lure, 200 feet out, and a fish grabs it as it's fluttering down, when you set the hook, there's no stretch in that line. You get a good hook set really far away. Obviously, another advantage is braid is very thin, so you can fit more on your reel. So you'll have more capacity on your reel, because these fish go on very long runs and you don't want to get spooled, which means the fish pulls all the line off your reel. And if you have braid on, you can hold significantly more line on your reel. So braid, that's what I like, 15-pound braid. And you're going to want one of those smoother, high thread count braids, like a X8, like a Daiwa X8 braid, or Berkeley X9, or Power Pro, whatever their thin, high braid carrier count line is. That's what you're going to want. It's a little more thin. It casts farther, in my opinion. It's a little more smoother. You don't hear that grinding noise in your reel in. That's what you're going to want.
Now, it won't dig into the spool as much too, with all that pressure of a salmon on there. Even on a spinning reel, it can start to dig into the line if it's not wound on tight enough. And those coarser braids, they'll catch on itself a bit more. So you could have it could essentially be making your drag less smooth as it comes off the reel.
Yeah. And if you are someone that likes to use monofilament, that's great. I did that for years before braid was super popular. I'd go for a 10 or 12 pound mono.
I actually really like fishing 12-pound mono on mine.
Yeah. It has its times, especially in clear water when the fish may be a bit more finicky. You could also attach a monofilament shock leader to braid.
Mhm.
Again, we go in depth on that in our last podcast. So when it comes to rods and reels, very briefly, you're going to want anywhere between an 8.5 and a 10-foot medium to heavy power spinning rod. And I say medium heavy or heavy because throughout the brands, they all react differently. So me and Andrew were actually at Gagnon's the other day, and we were looking at some of their salmon rods, and we picked up rods that were mediums. We picked up the new Shimano Compre salmon casting rod or spinning rod, and it was a heavy. I think it was an 8.6 heavy or a 9-foot heavy. And I was like, oh, a heavy. And I picked it up and I actually had a really soft tip on it, but a lot of backbone. And I was like, that would be a great spoon for like a spoon rod. And that's not a rod I would generally use because I'd normally get a medium heavy. So it really depends on the manufacturer. So you're going to have to pick up a rod and feel some rods that are in heavy may be way too stiff. And some mediums may feel like medium heavy. So go and feel the rod yourself. I say you can't go wrong with anywhere between a 9 and 9.5 foot medium heavy spinning rod. Again, load it up with 15-pound braid or 10 to 12-pound mono. And then for a reel, you're going to want a 4,000 size at least. Now, 2,500 and 3,000 size reels, they just don't cut it. Not only is the drag not as good, but the capacity is not enough. Like we said, these fish, when they run, they can peel line off like crazy. You don't want to have a 2,500.
No,
oh, easily. If you have a 2,500 size reel, I know there's guys who are like, oh, I've caught fish on 2,500 size reels. Yes, but you are very, very lucky you haven't got spooled yet. You're going to want a minimum of a 4,000 reel. This is my trusty Stratic. I have a bunch of them, 4,000 size. You don't need a Stratic though. You can literally get any high quality reel. Daiwa makes the BG, which is a fantastic.
To get one.
Yeah, that's a fantastic salmon reel. Buy the best one you can afford because this is the kind of fishing where the reel actually has to handle a lot of abuse. When you're bass fishing, say, or even musky fishing, your reel, you're not playing the fish on the drag that much. It's pretty much hook the fish. It may pull a little line off, and then you get it in the net. That's it. Salmon fishing is your line furiously screaming off your reel multiple times. You don't want to buy a cheap reel. You want to buy something that's quality. Doesn't mean it has to be expensive, but buy something that's quality and built well, because it'll actually last a lot longer than buying a junky reel that you might get one season out and then the drag melts because it's plastic. So buy a good quality reel. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put a bunch of rods and reels that we would recommend getting for shore casting for salmon in the link below in the show notes. And so we're going to go.
I was going to mention about just when you're setting your drag. So if you are using something like monofilament, it's a lot more forgiving because there's so much line stretch across the full length. I really like, if I'm using straight braid, to use a shock leader because it also helps. I'll use like 10 feet of mono and it gives me 3 feet of stretch just to give me a bit more leeway with that drag. If you're using straight braid, by all means you can do so. But if you're using especially the stiff rod and straight braid, if that drag, it's going to have a little bit of a delay, essentially, of actually letting the line come off. So you might want to have your drag a little bit looser than you might think for handling a fish that's 20 pounds, setting the hook. When they hit it, they're going to hit it hard. That hook's going to get in there pretty much. So don't have your drag set too tight, because the amount of times I had made the mistake before of having it set too tight, that salmon hits, and then in a matter of 2 seconds, it snapped 30-pound braid on me because my drag was too tight. And it's just because it's running so fast and aggressively. It's like, just like trying to stop a 10-ton weight falling like 50 feet and like, oh, I'll just catch this here. Like, it's a lot different than just holding it in the air. It actually has momentum moving with it.
Yeah. I've had many salmon snap me off. I've had salmon on braid jump and land on a tight line and snap the line. Like, it happens. So make sure you're really on your drag game. So that is salmon fishing 101. Now, there's a bunch of other items that we would recommend that you bring. We're not going to really go into these because, again, we covered them last year. Definitely listen to those. That podcast last year was really good. Got a lot of people said that they enjoyed it. So you're going to need a net, a big net. Again, these are fish. They're giant fish, especially if you're off a pier. You can't literally lean over. The water's pretty far down and you can't pull a fish up on line. So you're going to need a long handled telescopic net. That's one thing you're going to need. If you are night fishing, which I recommend, you're going to need a headlamp. That is very important, especially when you're, unhooking a fish and getting to the fishing spot. When you're fishing, I don't have it on, but as soon as I hook a fish, I turn it on.
And then you're also going to glow your spoons too.
You can use it to glow your spoons. Yep. You can get a UV flashlight, which really works great for glowing your lures. But if you don't have one, just use your headlight. It works great. And then I would recommend, depending on the area you're fishing, a hook sharpener. If you're fishing off the pier, you probably won't need it. But in some of the river mouths, there's a lot of rocks and logs and stuff like that. And you will get your lure stuck and then you'll have to rip it out and you look and your hook will be dull. So have a hook sharpener ready to go. And that's pretty much it. You bring a coffee, you go down after work or before work and you just cast and retrieve. That's it. And you don't have to switch spots all the time. Just find a good spot. The fish are just constantly swimming around. They're not in one spot. They're swimming around. So just keep casting and retrieving and hang on. It's going to be absolutely fun. If you guys catch your first shore casting salmon, make sure you tag us on social media so that we can see. It's always exciting when someone catches their first something. I just actually went camping this past weekend and I got my buddy on his first bass on a whopper plopper. It was exciting. It wasn't me that caught it, but it was exciting to watch him catch it. So, and that was just a small bass. So imagine catching your first 20-pound salmon. That's fantastic. So I hope this helped a little bit.
Yeah. And a couple of things I just wanted to mention, just gear-wise, that we found over the years has really helped us, is when you had lip grippers, and obviously pliers when hooking the salmon. Salmon, if you haven't caught them before, they have some mean-looking teeth. We talk about pike and muskie. Yes, they have very extremely sharp teeth and large teeth. Salmon, you can almost make a necklace out of those things. Some of those teeth can get big. So you don't want to be putting your hand into that salmon because they can have a lot of energy stored when you have that in the net. So we found having lip gripper, put it on the bottom jaw, and we can hold that nicely when we have the pliers that we were nowhere near to get risked. Because again, you're probably standing on a slippery surface down by the water's edge. And just to mitigate as much as possible for safety wise, those two little tools, they don't cost much to have a good pair of needle nose pliers and a good pair of lip grippers. They can, definitely keep you having a good time fishing at night.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely need pliers because sometimes when they grab that J13 and there's two sets of trebles in its mouth, you're not getting that out with your fingers, believe me. Those mouths are hard. So again, salmon fishing is a great time of year. If you're someone that's already, you're probably already out, you probably already caught fish by now. If you're just getting into it and you see that, you see people catching them, posting them on social media and you're like, man, I'd like to try that. You can get into it for not that much money. Now you do need slightly specialized gear. Again, you're fishing for giant fish. You're not fishing for, it's not like, oh, I have a bass rod, I can use it for walleye. This is slightly different. You do need some beefed up gear, but you don't have to spend a ton of money. And if you buy quality gear, it will last you years. All you need is a handful of lures. Len Thompson glow spoons will get it done. Again, we'd like to thank Jess and Brad from Len Thompson for having this giveaway. Again, one lucky Patreon member is going to win $100 to spend on their website, which is fantastic. They're going to
save a lot of money for salmon season.
Yeah.
That's
honestly,
awesome.
For $100, you could buy quite a few spoons. You'll be set up for a few years. And maybe if you're a nice guy or girl and you win, you'll buy a few spoons and you'll give some to your friend. Or if you're like me, you'll just keep them all to yourself.
Stockpile.
Yeah. So make sure you tag us in any of your salmon picks this fall and stay tuned for more episodes on river fishing for salmon, which is coming up pretty soon. So before we end this episode, we're going to end with, as tradition says, the quote of the week. And to handle that, we have the man with the mustache and the beard and the sail hat, Andrew.
Well, I would have to say, if I had to be any wrestler, if I had to choose a wrestler name, and I was like, it's fall time, we're going to start wrestling. It's me, the Slammin' Salmon. I think it's a pretty good wrestler name. Dressed in all pink. flopping on the deck.